Times front page this morning reports that more than 30 protests are being planned by the far right across Britain this weekend, raising one of the most serious prospects of public unrest since the 2011 riots. There's been a third night of unrest and violent disorder by far right groups. In Sunderland last night, a police station was set on fire. Rioters also targeted a mosque. In Liverpool, more than 40 riot police had to keep far-right protesters apart from anti-fascist marchers. That was after a brick was thrown towards a mosque. Let's speak to Lord Walney, the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption. Good morning to you, Lord Walney.
Good morning, Callum.
Good morning. It's good to speak to you. This is a situation that seems to have been escalating through the course of this week, and so does that make it difficult for police to anticipate and, frankly, for police to handle?
Well, the police, I think, can now, are able to anticipate the kind of trouble that's happening. And there is intelligence, obviously, the speed at which things are happening, and some of the channels are closed. But nevertheless, as the Times this morning shows, you can see often where trouble is about to happen, where the police are clearly hugely challenged is being able to mount a sufficient response to stop that escalating into the kind of violent scenes which we've had now in a number of towns, which are obviously hugely frightening for the members of the community who end up trapped alongside them, and very dangerous. I mean, when you've got rioters who are setting buildings on fire, then obviously the risk of threat to human life is very real in these situations.
Yeah. With that in mind, what can be done if this feels like a situation, as is being reported, that could escalate further over the course of the weekend? And as you assess the working relationship at this point between the government and police forces, are the resources in place? Is the government doing enough to support the police in efforts to get on top of this over the course of the next couple of days?
Well, I think Sir Keir Starmer was absolutely right to lead from the front this week and to bring police chiefs in. I would like to see the police commissioners who have that elected responsibility also fully involved in this process. And he has made clear the government will be fully behind the police in using the maximum suite of powers that they have to be able to keep this under control. And that includes, as of quite recently, strengthened powers over identifying the known troublemakers with a record of illegal of criminality in this kind of area, and stopping them from travelling to particular areas. Now, that requires a level of resource and intelligence swapping itself. That was one of the recommendations in my review recently, that we have to get better than that. Clearly, the government has plugged into that as well. But this is obviously a very fast-moving situation, and these new strengthened powers need to be tested to the full. But as you can see, these incidents can spring up very quickly, within hours, certainly within 24 hours. So I think the government, the new ministers in office, will understand that the British public will back them in whatever measures they feel is necessary to get this situation under control. Hopefully, we can see this petering out now over the next few days, and the extra effort and focus which is being put on forces being able to have effect. But if that isn't the case, I think the British public will back further action from ministers in this emergency to get things under control.
What would that further action mean?
Well, we don't know yet, and I think that is one of the things that behind the scenes that ministers will be thinking in very quick time to look at. But I think we should cast our mind back to the days of the days of COVID, where actually the public accepted an emergency situation during COVID and were prepared to to back and lawmakers were prepared to support the kind of temporary measures to ensure that basically rioters were not able to claim forgive me, back in COVID they were prepared to back measures that were needed in that situation. I think they would take a similar approach to keeping rioters off the streets now, given the scale of damage which is being done to communities.
Yeah, understood. Lord Walney, John Woodcock, thank you very much. Really good to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. This sort of the wider context this week was meant to be about the economy, starting with Rachel Reeves's big speech that was ending with the first interest rates cut, and it kind of shows, I suppose, that no matter who's in government, events can take on, and yeah, it's going to be probably a defining part of the early weeks and months of the Keir Starmer Labour administration is how they deal with the response to the tragic incident in Southport and kind of how it kind of responds. I mean, we have seen this, unfortunately, this kind of violence before. Obviously, there was big riots in 2011, but actually riots in places like Bradford, Oldham, Burnley in 2001 that were these kind of far-right people coming into those communities that had, big Muslim populations and stoking up hatred. And it took a long while to heal those divisions. And obviously, there's a chance that if this thing isn't dealt with, that those divisions are created again by kind of all this violence that we see.
Another note on this from the Times reporting, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, telling police chiefs that there is enough space in Britain's prisons should the disorder escalate significantly. There have already been more than 100 arrests across the country. Where has this prison space suddenly come from? Because a few weeks ago we were reporting on a crisis, a shortage of prison spaces.
Yeah, that is an excellent question, Callum, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions based on the MOJ how that happened, because I was looking back and back in July when Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, came in, they looked at changing the rules. So at the moment, there's an automatic release period after 50% of your tariff for certain offences you are released. They were going to change that to 40% of your tariff, and they suggested that was going to lead to opening up about 5,500 prison places, but only in September and October. And I was looking at the legislation itself, and the statutory instrument that was drawn up to make this change, I don't think has come into force yet. So I think it's quite interesting to hear that there is this sudden prison capacity. I'd like to know from the MOJ where that has come from, because you can move prisoners around, and that's one of the things that they might do is move prisoners around different parts of the country to where there is spare capacity to open up places to hold people who've been involved in this violence. But broadly, though it didn't look as though there was many spare cells anywhere in the country in the last couple of weeks. So it is going to be interesting to see where they do find that capacity. There's going to be some questions to be answered by the MOJ as to how they've suddenly magicked up prison places after talking about how big the kind of crisis was in their prison service.
Yeah, indeed. Right, let's go on some of the other political headlines around then this morning, Alan. So Kemi Badenoch, former business secretary, the Telegraph describes her as the front runner in the race to succeed Rishi Sunak as Conservative leader. It's her first interview since announcing her leadership bid. The sort of top line that they've gone for: we must stop pretending that integration is working. What do you make of Kemi Badenoch's message?
Well, I think it's interesting that, that's top line, but if you read the interview, she spends about half of it or more criticizing journalists for writing stories about her, which is, if you've covered Kemi Badenoch over the last couple of years, is not a surprise to anyone that's had to cover it. She takes a very combative approach, I would suggest, towards the media. But yeah, I think it's interesting that I had on Politics Time this week, I talked to supporters of all 6 of the candidates, and they all broadly talked about unity, bringing the party together, how the party's been divided over the past 5 or 10 years, and perhaps even longer, and that everyone is going to bring the party back from this kind of historic low they were. They need to be able to speak to all wings of the party. And Kemi Badenoch doesn't really appear to have heeded that message necessarily. She's quite happy to say it as she sees it. And I think she reckons she's got a prescription to bring the party back, to find those kind of conservative values that a lot of people who did support the party feel that they've kind of lost its way. So I think her message will connect with a lot of Tory grassroots, and that's why she's being talked up as the favourite, because ultimately it's going to be the Conservative members, not the MPs, who decide who the final leader is. And I think she's got a message that will kind of resonate with them. But I think she's more than happy to ruffle some feathers basically within her party in order to get there.
Yeah. Alan, thank you very much. Very good to speak to you this morning. Alan Tolhurst is chief reporter at Politics Home.
I'm going to do a correction. We're actually going to be speaking to the Police Federation after 7:30 this morning to get their reaction to what is going on with the events overnight, the violence that we've seen in Liverpool, the violence that we have seen in Sunderland, so you won't miss anything. Lots of your messages coming in on this, actually, this morning. Hilsey says, your Sunderland councillor has missed the point on immigration and the rioting. He may believe there is no connection, but the rioters do. And until people face up to that and engage with the issue, then it's just promoting the frustration and the violence. We need to win the argument, not ignore it.
This one from Alex says, if you want an excellent example of two-tier treatment in Britain, look no further than the tone and rhetoric of the police and politicians' statements around the unrest. Why, when somebody from an ethnic minority throws a brick at police, the language is community tensions, historic grievances and institutional discrimination. But when a white working class person does it, we only hear about shameful far-right thuggery. This crisis will not improve until we see equality of treatment by the establishment and our institutions.